Baker Show.
Okay, so before we launch back into tonight's show, let me just remind everyone that the Kev Baker Show is brought to you in association with GetTheTea.com. Yes, that's GetTheTea.com. Now, Ronnie McMullen is the man behind the company that is changing America one tea bag at a time. And let's just head on over and hear what Ronnie has to say about GetTheTea.com.
Times are changing. The circus of politics, healthcare's low standards and high prices, and let's not forget food quality. What to do? Arm yourself with life-change tea at GetTheTea.com. In a world of chemical imbalance and poor air and water quality, it's time you make a move. Log on to GetTheTea.com and stock up on organic non-GMO supplements. Don't forget the tea. Cleansing your body never felt so good. And we have a brand new tea called Takedown Tea, which helps support healthy glucose. All natural body support so you can be at your best, naturally. All you have to do is log on to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. We're not a fad that comes and goes. We are the real deal. Join us and armor up. GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Changing America's health one tea bag at a time.
So remember, folks, head on over there. Check out Get the Tea at GetTheTea.com. And remember to let Ronnie and the team know that you heard it here first on KBS. Let's get back into it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, it's your favourite time of day. Well, I hope it's your favourite time of day. I'm Kev Baker, and this is the Kev Baker Show. And of course, we're coming to you live from Smart City, Glasgow, Scotland. And we are broadcasting worldwide on Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. And have I got a treat for all of you tonight? Because in hour number one here, we've got a brand new guest. And I'll let you into a little secret. You all know how I kind of act on my gut when I find synchronicity, when I get that feeling to do something. I was just kind of scrolling down Twitter not long ago, and I seen a show that John B. Wells had done. And it was a name for his special guest that I didn't recognise, but it was all about technocracy. So I got a little tingle in the gut, and I followed it up. And here we are tonight, because it's led to what is going to be a brilliant show. And that word technocracy, it's a term that we hear increasingly bandied about in the alternative media scene, myself included. But just what is technocracy? And one could describe technocracy as a scientific dictatorship with an economic system far removed from one that we are all used to participating in today. But the thing is, technocracy, it's actually nothing new. And we can look to books like 1984, Brave New World, for example, to give us an idea of what a technocratic system may look like. But tonight we're going to take that further. We're going to give you part of the bigger picture of what's unfolding now. And we're going to learn so much more about technocracy with our very special guest, Patrick Wood. Now, Patrick Wood is the author of a number of books, including Technocracy Rising and Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order. Patrick is a leading and critical expert on sustainable development, green economy, Agenda 21, the 2030 Agenda, and historic technocracy. He's the author of Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. And Patrick is also a leading expert on the elitist Trilateral Commission, their policies and achievements in creating their self-proclaimed new international economic order, which is the essence of sustainable development on a global scale. An economist by education, a financial analyst by writing by profession, and an American constitutionalist by choice, Wood maintains a biblical worldview and has deep historic insights into modern attacks on sovereignty, property rights, and personal freedom. So I want to welcome Patrick Wood to the show. Thank you for joining me, sir.
You're entirely welcome. I'm just really pleased to be here and looking forward to communicating to your audience.
Well, I think for some reason, now is the time to do this show. And I say that because you've been speaking for quite a while about the topics I just listed there. And as I shared with you, it kind of encapsulates a lot of the topics that we cover here on the Kev Baker Show. And this thing, technocracy, I mean, how did you actually get into the whole technocratic kind of agenda? And what kind of prompted you into finding out more about this and exposing it?
Well, it took me about 30 years really to be prepared to see technocracy when it was presented to me. I started researching and writing about globalization back in the 1970s, and through a set of circumstances, I ran into the late Professor Anthony Sutton, who had just been a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. And he also was writing and researching about the Trilateral Commission. And what he didn't realize, I think, while he was at Stanford, was that the president of Stanford, who was David Packard of Hewlett-Packard fame, happened to be a member of the Trilateral Commission. And when they found out that Sutton had opened a project on the Trilateral Commission, they said, "Not on our watch," and they let him go.
Wow, and this Trilateral Commission, we hear about this time and time again, and they're one of these kind of groups that always come up in the pyramid of power. I mean, what more can you tell me about them?
Well, gosh, we ended up writing 2 books, Trilaterals Over Washington, Volumes 1 and 2, and I have to say it's all there. It's a little complicated, but the essence of it was that these very elite movers and shakers of the world, some were industrialists, some were bankers, some were politicians. It was kind of a diverse group, but it was brought together by David Rockefeller, the financier and the mega bucks guy from Chase Manhattan Bank, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who at the time was a political science scholar at Columbia University. And they formed this group in particular, I say, to create a new international economic order. That was all over their literature. This was never a conspiracy, Kev. It had nothing to do with that. Anthony Sutton was a world-class researcher and intellect, an academic of the highest order. He was able to get a hold of every document that the Trilateral Commission produced from day one. That's all we did. We read their own stuff. And that's what we reported on. There was no conspiracy in this. They spun it as a conspiracy because they didn't want to have the spotlight on them. But nevertheless, this very powerful group wanted to create a new international economic order. They took off with 300 people from Japan, from North America, and from Europe. And that's what they set about to do. It was a very slick marketing campaign that they pulled off after that, and it got very complicated. But essentially, it ended up with them passing off to the United Nations in particular, which had very close relationship with the Rockefeller family. They passed off the concept of sustainable development to the United Nations, and all of a sudden it became a worldwide program. This is what we're dealing with today. So, sustainable development is in every country on the planet. 193 nations have signed up for one form or another, whether it's Habitat 3 or the Paris Accord or Agenda 2030. Nations of the world have lined up to implement sustainable development everywhere. Basically, that is warmed over technocracy from the 1930s, and I've studied this every which way to Sunday, and there's no other way to look at it. This was not new. This was something actually quite old that essentially got hijacked. The whole concept of it got hijacked from the 30s and put into a modern context, in particular by Brzezinski. Brzezinski was the guy that brought it to Rockefeller's attention, and off they went to the races.
He truly has been kind of the key player, or one of the key players in this kind of move towards globalization, a new world order, for lack of a better term. But I like the fact you emphasize that there is no conspiracy here. That's one of the things that used to shock me when I first came across and started looking into this information, Patrick. The fact that it's all out there, you just have to go looking for it.
That's right. And a lot of people, of course, just don't, they want to shut their eyes. They don't want to know. So they don't look. But we looked. I don't know what made us different back then. I know Sutton he actually had an axe to grind after he got let go by Stanford because it ruined his career. And, if you're a scholar like that, I mean, where do you go? You can't go be a greeter at Walmart. So, you can't get your books published because you don't have a publisher and you don't have access to the research system anymore. All the university libraries and stuff around the world.
I mean, that's very similar to the tactics that we've seen when it came to the whole global warming agenda and the carbon taxes and stuff like that. But I'd like to ask you, I mean, what was the technocracy of the 30s like compared to the one we see today then? I mean, would it have been a better system before we had all of these Googles and social medias and everything else and big data coming along?
No, actually, it hasn't changed. The core of it has not changed one iota since the 1930s. And I'll read you the definition of technocracy out of one of their magazines in 1938, and you can judge whether this is still a modern definition or not. They said, and this is a direct quote, technocracy is the science of social engineering, that's number one, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism, that's number two, to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population is number three. A short little definition hits the nail on the head all the way around. And there's several things you can pull out of this. It's the science of social engineering ought to stand the hair up on anybody's neck. That means controlling people, basically making people do what you want them to do. But you see the economic nature of this. This is an economic system, not a political system. The goal of it was to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. Let's think Alibaba. Let's think Amazon. Let's think, those types of operations where basically production and consumption are all under one roof, and people are marketed to and sold to and analyzed and predicted as to what they're going to buy and all this kind of stuff. And these guys defined this whole thing way back then. And you say, well, they didn't have the technology back then. And they didn't. There was no supercomputers or anything like that. But I will mention that for sure, just to give a little solidity to it, Columbia University was where this whole thing started in New York City. It was the major progressive university back in that day. And Columbia University had only one building at the time, but it had a basement. And that's where they put their temporary projects. And that happens to be where the technocracy group ended up. Most of the senior scientists and engineers at Columbia were part of this group, but there were some from outside as well. All extremely elevated people in the engineering world. They weren't people off the street. They weren't mechanics. They weren't welders, whatever. None of that. These are very elite academic people. And they set themselves about creating an economic system that would save the world from the Great Depression. It's a brand new thing. Nobody had ever created an economic model before, but the engineers and scientists thought they could do it and that they were going to be the saviors of the world. Well, they figured social engineering was the way to go, and just basically engineer society with their scientific method. And they thought, well, they just wrap everybody into this and it'd all be good. And everybody would just go along and think, wow, this, we only have to work, 20 hours a week. We get all this leisure time. We're living in abundance. We all have nice houses. And this was a utopian view. It just, cannot possibly work. And you're right by the way, about the book Brave New World, which happened to be written by Aldous Huxley in 1932. That's the very same year that technocracy was at Columbia University. Can we connect the dot here? It's like, yeah, he was looking at technocracy when he got the inspiration to write the book. And even back then, they had enough scientific, insight into the future that they saw this is the direction it's going to go, is towards a scientific dictatorship ultimately.
And, just at the weekend there, we had news, it might be a rumor because they're looking into it, but genetically modified babies. We've now got artificial wombs as well, so we can bring babies to term without any kind of mother involved in this. And that is so on line or in line with what we heard in Brave New World, right, with the incubator babies and things.
It really is, and I doubt that anybody's using Brave New World as a script or anything, to do anything in the world today. But Huxley had great insight back then, and he wasn't a physical scientist so much as he was a futurist, I think, at that point. But he saw where the thing was headed, and this is exactly what's happened. People have used science or misused science to do all kinds of things ever since. And I have to say, just to make a caveat, personally, I love technology. I have all the technological gadgets. I'm such a hypocrite. I really am, because I'm usually the first to get the gadgets, but I almost see this is my kind of guilty conscience speaking, probably. As long as you know that they're used for control, then that kind of takes some of it out of it. So that's my get out clause. Right. That's right. And technology should serve mankind, not the other way around. And, there's nothing inherently evil about technology, but there is definitely something evil about men that want to misuse it for the sake of controlling people and doing crazy things. And you brought up the genetic engineering thing, which leads me to the next point. There is absolutely no sense of morality or ethics involved in technocracy whatsoever. It is sterile in that sense. It is agnostic as well. And so there is no common sense, or there's no ethical checks and balances to keep these people from doing stuff that could well destroy mankind.
Well, I'm going to lay it on the line early then, since you've gone here, because I love what you're saying. And we have Elon Musk, and he's often spoke about the regulation of AI. And I sometimes speculate, Patrick, and I'll get your opinion on this, but, this technocratic system, ultimately, I see an AI God figure or Godhead right at the helm of all of this. Now, am I just going too conspiratorial, or is that really part of the plan?
Hey, listen, you're too late, Kev. The Church of AI has already been formed in Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
It has.
Well, yes, it's called Omega something. Yeah, it's too kind of.
I do not recommend anybody goes there and joins it, by the way.
And we also now have the Church of Blockchain as well. They have their own religion.
That's right. Yeah. So in many cases, this is a religious proposition, and that strikes a lot of people as very strange. But let me tell you how they can do this. It's not a mystery if you understand a little bit about how philosophy has moved forward over the last few hundred years. Back in around 1800, a French philosopher by the name of Henri de Saint-Simon, who is a Frenchman, he was later and still is considered the father of technocracy philosophically. He's also the father of transhumanism. Both groups look to Saint Simon as being the guy who started it all. And that includes the religion of scientism. Scientism is the philosophical undergirding of both technocracy and transhumanism. And let me just show you what Saint Simon said about scientism. This he wrote a lot about it. People have written about it a lot in the last century. Lots of articles out there on scientism. If people want to know, they can go get lots of critique on it. But here's what Saint Simon said, and here was the beginning of the problem. You'll see it. He said, "A scientist, my dear friends, is a man who foresees. It is because science provides the means to predict that it is useful, comma, and the scientists are superior to all other men," close quote. That's huge. That's where it all started. That, in my opinion, that's where it started wrong way back then. Because a scientist cannot, in my opinion, cannot foresee. He does not have a crystal ball. Science does not have the means to look ahead, like pre-crime analysis, for instance, that a lot of people are into today. And scientists are not superior to all other men. That is insane. But you can see the ego trip, the narcissistic ego trip that men can get, can buy into if they buy into scientism. He went on to say that the only source of truth is determined scientifically. In other words, there is no truth known to man outside of what science can prove according to the scientific method. That means that things like love, emotions, like anger and jealousy, those things can't be proved per se, that they don't exist. And they say the same thing about the Bible. Well, that's just a book of myths and stories, and there's no truth in that. Forget it. It's not scientific. So we see this exactly today. It's the same thing we see the God of global warming today. Well, what is it like? It's like an oracle or something, like the volcano to the Aztecs, back a few hundred years ago. Well, you go up to the top of the volcano and the priest listens very carefully to what the volcano is burping. And then he comes down the mountain and he tells the villagers below, you need to offer 2 virgins next month or the volcano is going to spit on you and wipe you out. And so, it's got a priesthood. This global warming thing has a priesthood, people like Al Gore. And, they say deniers deserve to be punished. This is not a scientific proposition. This is a religious proposition, completely. So these people have turned a lot of this stuff into a religion, even though they say they're not religious.
I look a lot at people like Ben Goertzel, the man behind Singularity.net. And it's also very kind of associated with Sophia the robot. And then you've got Geordie Rose from D-Wave Computers, and they're into something strange as well, Patrick. And they call it cosmicism. And this is the literary philosophy developed by H.P. Lovecraft, stating that there is no recognizable divine presence, such as a god, in the universe, and that humans are particularly insignificant in the larger scheme of intergalactic existence. And these are the people that are creating quantum computers and the robots that are really rolling out amongst us today.
Well, they are. And, a lot of the things we might talk about, AI and social media and all that stuff, a lot of this emanates from Silicon Valley in California. And it so happens that a lot of the people, workers there, including some of the CEOs of these companies, are having attacks of conscience that maybe what they're doing is going to be harmful for humanity, and they're starting to feel guilty, and they're some of them are getting insomnia and depression and other types of personality disorders that comes with a guilty conscience. And what's interesting is that many of these people are being drawn down the coast of Southern California to a little place called Big Sur, where an Eastern Mysticism Institute exists called Esalen Institute. And Esalen has recently been repurposed to serve Silicon Valley as a meditation / therapy center to help these poor people up there in Silicon Valley assuage their consciences and, kind of put their lives back together, as they say. They're not turning to any traditional means. They're not turning to psychologists. They're not turning to biblical counselors or church pastors or anything like that. They're turning to Eastern mysticism to solve their conscience problems. And this, of course, is, that's religion. And they say they're not religious, but they'll gladly go down and sit naked in a hot tub and contemplate their navel while they meditate on, some Eastern god or goddess or guru. But they say they're not religious. Well, they're getting fed lies from all different directions up there in Silicon Valley. I've never seen such a mess in my life. And I grew up in Northern California. I know that area quite well. I've never seen such a mess develop of human deception that I see in Silicon Valley today. And these are the people that are bringing us all this stuff today. They're the ones that, that are creating the tools, the modern things that we're talking about and struggling with. And, it's just, it is very disturbing on the surface of it, I have to say. But the deeper you look, the more you can kind of understand how they got to where they are. We just need to get them out.
Exactly. It's as simple as that. You mentioned Silicon Valley there. And one of the things that I like to point out, and again, it's all out in the open, Patrick, and that's the fact that a lot of the seed money for these incubator kind of startups is coming straight from the military-industrial complex in places like DARPA.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, DARPA is of course, very, very American, fully American. It serves the Pentagon as their high-tech research center for warfare. And you'd think on the surface of it that, well, maybe DARPA should just keep their nose in the military and leave everything else alone. But that's not what they do. They've got create the craziest projects you ever saw in the world. And I have concluded after watching them for probably 15 years now that they are chock full of technocrats. They invent because they can, not because there's a need, and not because there's any common sense reason to do so. They simply invent because they can. Very dangerous ideology.
Well, I introduced the audience here not that long ago to their sister organization. And of course, they are called iARPA. I'll be talking during the break with Patrick about that. We'll come back on the other side, but what a show this has been so far. And you can check out Patrick's work over at the very aptly named technocracy.news. Join us on the other side, folks. We'll be right back.
This is the Camp Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all enjoying tonight's show as much as I am with Patrick Wood. Join us after the break as well. In hour number 2, I'm going to be joined by our good friend, Don Wiskin from Extendovite. So I'll be dropping the phone numbers in the chat room. You can phone Don in hour number 2. Jimmy Jeans will be there with me as well. And maybe, fingers crossed, we'll have Johnny Whistles. But back to tonight's guest. And like I say, this is absolutely fascinating. I'm loving this. Guest name is Patrick Wood. You can check out his website, technocracy.news. Patrick, do you have any other websites or pages that people can follow you? I've got you on Twitter now, so I know you're on there, but where can people keep up to date with you?
That's the best place, is technocracy.news. I've used that website as a place to post current articles about technocracy from all around the world.
It's amazing. It's one of my websites. I've got folders along the top, so I've got my websites to check. And this is why I had to act when I seen your name and I made the association, because it's one of the websites that really covers AI really, really well. And I appreciate that so much.
Well, that's good, and that's really right in my radar. Artificial intelligence is just huge. I just by the by, I went to one of the first artificial intelligence meetings in the country back in, I think it was 1992, 91 or 92, in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I thought, wow, I was in the computer business, and I thought, man, this is great, artificial intelligence. And I went to this meeting. And they had a couple of people there that became the fathers of AI. And the whole time, a 3-day conference, I think it was, I lasted for a day before I said, this is dumb, I'm leaving. But for 3 days, they discussed the proposition, John gave Mary the book. That was the challenge, to try and figure out how to make sense out of a children's book sentence, John gave Mary the book. And after listening to these guys for a while, I said, man, I can't take it anymore. I don't care who gave her the book. I don't care who John is. I don't care who Mary is either, or how old they are, or whatever. But yeah, artificial intelligence definitely has grown up, and it is upon us, and it is very, very disturbing in all accounts.
Absolutely. And, it's thanks to our good friend Nano Girl who lives in Silicon Valley. I came across that organization I mentioned before the break, and they're very heavy into testing artificial intelligence. And, of course, It's iARPA. And the night that we revealed that, it was a show on this network. And the audience, and even my fellow kind of co-hosts on the show, their jaws were hitting the floor, Patrick, because they'd never really heard of this company or this organization, a government organization called iARPA. And during the break, you gave me the bigger picture to this, and it's a big piece of the puzzle, especially when it comes to the Trilateral Commission we covered in the first part.
Well, I know, and one of the chapters in my new book, The Hard Road to World Order, addresses the topic that that all of this stuff started, that the entire body of information about what we're talking about here, the whole enchilada was started back in the early 70s by the Trilateral Commission. They were the instigators to this. And so I have tracked them every step of the way ever since. And I won't go into it all with you, but you brought up iARPA. Since you did, people will notice when they go there, it's easy to find. It's iarpa.gov. It belongs to the government right off there. And you'll see at the very top of the screen, it's the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That's where iARPA gets its marching orders. It's a project of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That's the intelligence czar for the United States now. It's a cabinet-level position. It's been held by several people since it was created in 2005. And it used to be that America had 17, I think, different intelligence agencies that did different things. All the military had their own units, and Coast Guard even had one, and there were some other agencies that had intelligence divisions. Every single intelligence organization was restructured and given under the authority of the Director of National Intelligence, and so that was major. It was huge, and so this person now has line item budget responsibility for every agency in the country, and nothing happens except that it gets approved by the DNI. Well, back in 2005, when this whole thing started, George Bush was president, and he was the guy that actually started the office of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And the first guy he appointed to restructure America's intelligence community, and remember, technocracy and Trilateral Commission go together from day one. The person he appointed to restructure America's intelligence system in the most radical way ever in history was a guy by the name of John Negroponte. He served for 2 years as the first DNI. He was the guy that did all of the organization, all of the restructuring, all of the setting up of the deputy director positions and all that kind of stuff. He was the one that did it. John Negroponte was a member of the Trilateral Commission. And I have to say, not just an incidental member. He had been a principal member for years before he was appointed as the first DNI to restructure America's intelligence. Now we see out of that office comes iARPA. It says, be the future. That's its subtitle. Be the future.
Own the future.
Yeah, own the future. Boy, I'll tell you, this is so in line with the way the technocrat movement, the technocracy movement, has taken over the world, and it's in process of taking over America as well. And this has been the best kept secret that you can possibly imagine in all of history, in my opinion, at this point. It's all sitting there in plain sight. Just nobody knows how to connect the dots anymore. If they did, I think they'd freak.
I mean, I look to China right now, and it's widely kind of held that it's a communistic kind of country, a pretty brutal one at that. But when you look at the smart cities, the social scoring systems that are going into place, surveillance, you know, would you agree that that's rapidly approaching a technocratic system?
Well, it is. And this is something else that's a misconception, not necessarily a deception, but at least a misconception that China is still a communist country. It has ceased to be a communist country at least back to the year 2000, probably a little bit earlier than that. And academics from around the world have openly declared that China is a technocracy now, that most of their ruling party have advanced scientific degrees. And you look at the things that they do in their country, and they're very clearly engineering their society. It's the science of social engineering. Now, where did they pick up this doctrine? Well, they picked it up from the Trilateral Commission. And the reason I say that is because it was Zbigniew Brzezinski, when he was National Security Advisor for Jimmy Carter back in the 70s, it was Zbigniew Brzezinski who reintroduced China to the world stage. That's documented. It's history. It's in the history books. It was Brzezinski who did it. Well, he had some help from Henry Kissinger, another member of the Trilateral Commission. But as China came back into the fold, if you will, they were inundated with investments from companies who were associated with the Trilateral Commission. And so giant engineering companies like Bechtel Engineering, they went over and were doing projects in China before it was even legal for them to do so. They never got tagged for it either, but they had made billions off of China setting up infrastructure projects before the factories even showed up. So the West, the technocrats in the West, have used China as an experimental bed, if you will, to create the society that they see should be ruling the world. So yes, to answer your question, China, yes, this is exactly what technocracy looks like when it's being implemented throughout the country. You have certainly a budding scientific dictatorship. They're not quite there, but almost, where they'll have one camera for every 2.5 people in the country. They have 1.4 billion people. And they will track every individual from the time they get up, go out of their house, come back at night. They know everything there is to know about every individual. And they have implemented the social scoring, credit scoring system, as you mentioned, that measures how good a citizen they are and how valuable they are to the state. And if you're a kind of on the rebel side, a little bit of a misfit, you're not going to have the privileges that the good little line and party people will get if they are valuable to the technocracy.
But in the end, just the other day, Patrick, sorry to interrupt you, but he was in China and he was displaying to, I think it was a reporter from, it was either the UK or America. He tried to book a train ticket. And like we all talk about on these shows nowadays, there it was for everyone to see. He just could not process it. It just would not process for him because his credit score was not high enough. So there's public transport. They restrict your movement.
That's exactly right. This is happening. This is already in place in China based on the social credit scoring system. And when we say social credit, has nothing to do with money. The social credit means that the word social comes first here. It's not about money. It's about your behavior. Are you a good little citizen or are you a bad little citizen? And they figure that out by looking at your whole portfolio of activities, who your friends are, what you buy, what you say on the phone, the emails you send, the things you post up on WeChat or whatever, they're equivalent to Facebook and so on. They look at all this stuff and they arbitrarily, by algorithm, assign a score to you that determines your entire future, including whether or not you'll ever travel again.
This is the thing, and I keep talking about this. This isn't kind of confined to China, folks. You know, all of our posts on social media, everything we do, like Patrick says, from the minute we wake up, with all of the gadgets in our home now, with the Internet of Things, all of this system, it's around us. It's here for everyone to see, Patrick, and it relies on big data. And we've almost been duped into giving all of that up, you know, with social media, YouTube, everything else. And we've pretty much built the system around us, and we never even seen it coming.
That is the nature of deception. That's all I can say to it. That's the nature of deception. We've done these things, and we've invented these technologies. And I say we, it's not you and me, but it's been invented. And the proper use of those technologies never really came to fruit. It never really happened the way it was supposed to happen. And all of a sudden, you look around and we're encircled, we're entrapped by this, scientific dictatorship. And it's got nowhere to go but worse at this point. I think it was in Atlanta, Delta Airlines in Atlanta, just this week announced the first biometric airport system where from curb to plane, your face will be recognized and you will be identified as you get out of your car and walk to the airport, go through the lines and get on, go to the boarding place and get on the aircraft and so on. 100% now will be controlled by facial recognition, what they call biometric kiosks. And, travelers are saying, well, gee, that's wonderful. Saves us a bunch of time and it's not so much of a hassle. But, this technology is going to sweep the travel industry over here in America. It's just like China. They're doing it already in China. We're doing it.
There's almost a Hegelian dialectic to that, isn't there? Because you have everyone moaning about airport security the time you're in there. And now here comes a system that answers all of those questions and solves all the problems, and people welcome it.
Well, I know. And, isn't it convenient that, we talked about Google a little bit. Google is used to be run by a guy named Eric Schmidt. He left Google to be the chairman of the board, CEO, whatever, of the parent company of Google, Alphabet. And he recently resigned from that as well. So he's kind of a free floater right now. But back in 2016, when a technocrat by the name of Ash Carter was Secretary of Defense in America, Eric Schmidt was appointed to head a committee at the Pentagon on how to integrate Silicon Valley into the government. And this is Eric Schmidt. Now, okay, there's a backstory here. Eric Schmidt is a member of the Trilateral Commission. And here he is now rubbing shoulders and telling the Pentagon, I'm sure he's talking to the iARPA people, he's telling the Pentagon how to integrate Silicon Valley technology, AI, et cetera, into the Pentagon and into the government.
You can make this up.
You can't make this up. And you say, well, where's the deception here? Well, deception is how many people know that the policies, many of the policies we're coming up upon today, like Delta having a biometric airport terminal that they're just raving about. Where does this stuff come from? Who's encouraging this stuff? Well, I can tell you, the people at the top, like the Office of the DNI, like people like Eric Schmidt, people like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, even Bill Gates, for that matter, he's up to his eyeballs in this stuff too. All of these types of people, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, these people are encouraging technocracy, rule by algorithm.
And you've got people like Google building their own smart cities now as well. And of course, I joke with you that I'm in this really lucky place in the UK. We won the competition, 28 million towards the first smart city. And nothing
Yes.
to worry about. Most of that 28 million went to an Israeli security company called Nice Security. And they're the ones that look after me from the minute I leave the door to the minute I come back again. And it feels like living in that airport that you were talking about a moment ago. But over here in the UK, Patrick, it's been very kind of veiled. It's almost this technocratic system with the velvet glove on, because we have had CCTV over here for so long. It was incremental. And I remember when people used to kind of point them out years ago, and it would just be one camera there. And now we're at the point where we can literally get watched 300 times in a day and nobody even notices it. So do you think it's a bit of a no-brainer really, but it's your take on smart cities. They would love to have everybody living in these smart cities, right?
Well, they would. And smart cities is a key focus in my new book, by the way, The Hard Road to World Order. You have, there's different layers that you could look at smart cities. You could look at the infrastructure aspect of it. You can look at the whole smart city itself, and essentially, and one of my conclusions is, basically they become glorified labor camps for these giant companies that want to, want to have employees and stuff to do stuff. They basically just labor camps. And if anybody's ever lived around a labor camp, they know what they're all about. They're not about the workers. They're about the people they work for. And so smart cities now are emerging as the place to drive people to go and live, so that they can all be, compacted and monitored and managed, kind of like a herd, if you will, of animals. And it's not any more complicated than that. But then on top of that, you have the corporate world has created this crazy supply chain. This is all part of technocracy again, to supply goods and services to everybody. But they developed the supply chain where they're connecting smart cities together. They're trying to move them into be global cities, if you will, but they're connecting these cities together so that they can perfect the supply chain by moving goods and services back and forth in special conduits between different cities of the planet.
The more information they have, the better they can optimize that system.
That's exactly right. And so they look at the new world that's coming, not as a world of nation states, but as a nation of connected cities, which will conduct all the trade in the world. And if there is a nation state, it's going to be a secondary thought, kind of like Europe and the EU right now. You still have national identities, Germany, Italy, whatever, but all the power and all the control is in the EU. They're just there by name, mostly by name, not by, function.
They're almost like the bureaucratic arm of the scientific system.
Yes. Well, at least they get to, determine some of the low-level stuff that they're going to do. Like the nuts, some of the nuts and bolts of what goes on in cities and stuff they don't care about. But any substantive decision is being made at the top, and they have no power to say anything about it.
Absolutely. And of course, we had a brief conversation about our illustrious leader over here, Terry Mayhem, as I like to call her. She, I don't know what she is. But how instrumental she has been in building out the system in the UK, because, as we were joking, we used to call her Big Sister over here because she was Home Secretary, and she was the one that put a lot of this kind of apparatus for the surveillance side of things in place. Yes, indeed. And you remember just recently, I think it was this year, January this year, an Irish businessman who you probably will recognize, Peter Sutherland, was for many, many years was the chairman of the executive branch of the Trilateral Commission. And Peter Sutherland, along with other prominent people in Europe over the decades who have belonged to the Trilateral Commission, were primarily responsible for bringing the EU to the point where it is today. This was they crowed that this was their baby, and this was the model that they wanted to create. So you have a Peter Sutherland who was appointed as UN Special Representative for International Migration by the United Nations,
remember the tight association between the Trilateral Commission and the United Nations.
Like a revolving,
and he was
Patrick.
The revolving door, and he went out to stump all around Europe to beat down migration quotas or beef up migration quotas. This was years before the migration invasion started in Europe. And he was the guy that said that the future of sustainable development is a multicultural society. And so he beat up governments all over Europe and got them to agree to certain quotas and stuff for immigrants that I expect he knew were coming, but they didn't, and at the time. And so as this whole invasion started in Europe, you have this guy running around chastising those very governments he beat up before, saying, don't you dare restrict your quotas that you agreed to. And that became a whole nother debacle. But these people have been movers and shakers on the global scene for so long. People just don't even pay attention anymore, I guess. But, I tracked somebody from over here, like a Peter Sutherland, and said, what is this guy doing? What is he writing? What's he saying about? Now, if you look at his biography, which is easy to find on the internet, you look at his biography and you look back and you say, oh my gosh, it doesn't matter this guy's from Ireland or from the moon. Here's the guy who was chairman of Goldman Sachs, for Pete's sake, from 1995 to 2015. This guy, he was director general of the World Trade Organization back in the 90s. And, it just goes on. And you say, this is the guy that's crafting policy, all the immigration policy in Europe. And this guy is a member of the Trilateral Commission. You can't make this stuff up.
Oh, man. I really hope you come back sometime really soon. We can get into a lot more of these topics, Patrick. But just briefly before we go to the break, I mean, the Tavistock Institute, I take it you've come across that in your travels, yes?
Yes, I have.
Very instrumental, would you say, on a par with the trilaterals in the US?
I would not put it on a par exactly, but I would put it in the same class. And the reason I say that, I talk a lot about the Trilateral Commission, but they're not the only ones that have, influence here. There's probably a group of about maybe 1,500 to 2,000 people that you could point to that are the elite of the elite. Tavistock Institute, if you look at the membership, would certainly be in that crowd. But you also have the Atlantic Institute. You have the groups like the Council on Foreign Relations, some of them anyway. You have the Club of Rome, it's another one. So
that's the Committee of 300. That's another name for that one, isn't it?
Well, that's right. And there's people have tried to identify the group, it is. But the group is relatively small, and Tavistock is part of that group. That's all I can say. Well, the Bilderberg group is another one.
We are almost at time, Patrick. Where can people get a hold of your new book? And like I say, I hope we can bring you back sometime real soon for the full 2 hours, and we can get into a lot more of this stuff.
Well, certainly so. Technocracy.news is where people can find me, and my book is available there. It's also available on Amazon, both in the U.S. and in the U.K.
Absolutely brilliant. Patrick Wood, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back after the break with Don Wiskin. Hour number 2 on the way right here on TFRlive.com.